The ironic thing was that Nakabachi theory was completely correct and completely revolutionary. The Russian government was worried about it leaking, and the SVR was doing everything it could to keep it under wraps. But under the surface, there was a full-scale information war beginning over the paper. The time traveler from 2036, John Teeter, had told me so, which meant it had to be true. Was World War III really going to happen? There was no point in thinking about it. Just a little more before the drugs kicked in. I closed my eyes. And we faded to black. Several hours later. The convention was going well. These same people were still here. After Professor Izuki's seminar, most of the students from my university went home, but I killed some time and came back. I wanted to hear the Victor Condrea lecture. I headed to the hall with plenty of time to spare and saw Maho Hyajo coming from the staff room. That's a dude. She was with a very tall foreigner. Was that Alexis Leskinen? It didn't seem like an American name, but maybe he was an immigrant like Kuroso, or at least descended from one. Sounds like a Russian name. Or at least some sort of like Eastern European name. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the looks on their faces were so serious that I couldn't help but listen. Since they were both speaking in English, I could barely make out any of it, but I could tell from their voices that it wasn't a pleasant chat. Wait, did I just hear the word makase? I hated the fact that I couldn't speak English. There's a good scene in the first game where he has to speak English, or at least talk to someone who speaks English. If I'd known this was going to happen, I would have gone to an English school. The two of them walked into the waiting room for lecturers. It was located right next to the UPX theater. I put together the few fragments I was able to understand. Fire at Kuroso's house. Mrs. Makase is alright. Robbery. The police called off the investigation. Why was the FBI there? It doesn't make sense. I think that's what they were saying. Kuroso's house? Do they mean where she lived in America? Her mother should still live in America. Is that where the fire was? And then words like robbery and the investigation was called off. I really wanted to know more. I stood there and worried until it was time for the lecture to begin. With nothing else to do, I went inside the theater. I could tell earlier by looking at the size of the crowds going inside, but it was a very high energy crowd. The atmosphere was clearly different than Izuki's seminar, which was mostly students there for credit. The place was nearly full with a crowd of scientists and people who wanted to learn about cutting-edge technology. Victor Condrea's researchers had published a slate of papers in science recently and had gotten a lot of media attention. Maybe that was why. Were there any open seats? I mean, there's a few right there I can see. I found an open seat at the edge. But when I looked at who was sitting next to it, I moaned. Ha! Ha! Of course. You again. Moeka Kirio was there. She was speaking to no one, just typing endlessly into her phone. I'd once named her Shining Finger because of her incredible typing speed, and she was as fast as ever. Who was she talking to? I didn't even want to imagine. I quickly turned away and looked for another seat. Dr. Leskinen reached the podium almost the exact instant I sat down. There was a huge wave of applause. When they saw a tiny little girl come up next to him, the applause faded into confused murmurs. Maho must have expected this. Her expression didn't change in the slightest as she stood next to the professor. In fact, when she took the microphone from the professor and looked around the theater, she looked like she belonged there.
Ladies and gentlemen.
First, Dr. Leskinen began to speak in English. When he made eye contact with Maho, she began to interpret.
Thank you for attending.
皆さん、本日は私のセミナーに集まってくださって感謝します。
I am Alexis Leskinen
ビクトル・コンドリア大学脳科学研究所のアレクシス・レスキネンです。専門は脳信号処理システムおよび人工知能理論になります。
She must be like a hell of a translator if she's able to like translate on the fly while he's still talking. Like that's some fucking talent.
そして私は助手のヒアジョウ・マホです。同じく脳科学研究所で教授の指導に沿って研究をしています。よろしく。
He didn't say that, but I'm going to say it. The audience started murmuring again. That was the same way I responded when I met her. Well, that'll happen, yeah.
Now, without further ado,
では早速ですが、私たちの最先端研究の一端をご紹介します。
I know today's theme is
テーマは
revolution in
人
artificial
工知能
intelligence.
革命
But I
とし
think
ました
you
が
will find this research
これからデ
will
モンストレー
exceed
ション
your
するシステムは
wildest expectations.
おそらく皆さんの想像を超えたものではないかと思っています。
Dr. Luskin stood in front of the laptop that had been placed on the podium and started to type.
This terminal here is connected to
こ
one
の
of
パソコン
the
ですが
supercomputers that
研
can
究所のスーパーコンピューターの一つと接続されています。ああ、まだプロジェクターには映さないで。
One of the staffers was about to display the laptop screen on the front projector. Some kind of important program must have been booting up because Maho Hyajo stopped him.
Sorry, this is all
す
still
み
in
ません、
development.
まだ開
We
発途
haven't
中なん
had
です。
time to develop much of UI
非
yet.
常に美的センスのないプログラムが画面いっぱいに溢れ返っています。
Honestly, I'm
こ
a
んな
little
チープな
embarrassed
プログ
by
ラム
all
を
this
見られるのは
computer
恥ず
data.
かしい。
I almost feel like
裸を見られるよりもね。
Alright.
any engineers out there?
この中にエンジニアの方がいるなら理解していただけますよね。
You engineers, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, eh? Wink. Some of the audience got the professor joked and laughed.
Anyway, while this finishes
起
spinning,
動するまでの
I'll
間
give you a quick
この
overview
シス
of
テ
our
ム
system.
全体の概略を説明しましょう。
There was another projector in the center of the stage. A diagram appeared on a screen. And at the top of the diagram was a Japanese translation for the general audience. An analysis of neural pulse signals relating to memories stored in the temporal lobe. I knew that title well. In fact, I was sure I could never forget it. It was the title of an essay written by a 17-year-old genius and published in Science. She had completely analyzed the nerve impulse patterns that govern human memory and used that to digitize the memories themselves into data. And she had used that to invent the time leap machine right in front of my eyes. Though, none of that had actually happened anymore.
We've actually been featured in a
サ
few
イエン
journals
ス誌に
recently,
掲載されたので
so some of you
ご
may
存知の
already
方も
be
いるでしょ
familiar
う。
with the project. It was proposed by a very talented
これは
Japanese member of our team.
私たちのチームにいた天才的な日本人研究者によって提唱され完成されたものです。
Human memories are stored in
人間の記
several
憶は
topics,
大
particularly
脳
in
皮
the
質、
temporal lobe.
とりわ
A
け
little like freshman
側頭葉に記録されます。いわゆるフラッシュメモリみたいなもの。
The part of the temporal lobe
そ
that
のメモリ
controls
に
the
記
typing
憶を
and
書き
reading
込
of
んだり
memories is
読み出したりするのが
prohibited
側頭葉にある海馬傍回という部位になります。
Dr. Luskin pointed to the diagrams of the brain and hippocampus on the screen.
The brain works by transmitting
脳は
electrical signals between
ニューロン
cells
と呼ばれる
called
細
neurons.
胞の間を電気信号が伝わっていくことで働いています。
It's all true. You're gonna learn something today.
What we call memories are
記
just
憶
those
というのも
electrical signals and
実
they
は
are
こう
controlled
い
by
っ
the
た電
cognitive
気信号の
generals.
伝わりの一つなのです。その働きを制御しているのが海馬傍回と言ってもいいでしょう。
In other words,
つまり
electrical signals passing through
電
the
気信号
cognitive
が
generals
海馬
is
傍回を
what
出
creates
入り
memories.
することで記憶は作られていくんですね。
That was a foundation for
そこで
Christian case.
マキセ・クリスはこの論文を書いた日本人研究者です。
And excuse me, I mean,
あの、
Ms. Makise, one of our
マキ
research
セ研
assistants.
究員は考えました。
You see here, electrical signals, signal patterns. There's
海
several
馬傍
topics.
回を通る電気信号が電気信号のパターンと大脳皮質の
Maho started to have trouble with her interpreting. She was getting confused. No matter how good you are with languages, interpreting for a long period of time had to be difficult. I'd once read an article on the internet that said even a professional can't do it for more than 20 minutes. I wonder if that's actually true. International conferences and live broadcasts from overseas were actually handled by a team of people switching off. Or maybe... There was one of the pre-Tokyo Game Show Sony press conferences they did, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, where they did the entire conference in Japanese. They had I forget the Sony guy's name. Andy House, because he's dual linguist. He can speak English and Japanese. He did the entire press conference in Japanese, obviously because it's for the Japanese media and everything. But they had like a team of interpreters talking over him, and it was like the weirdest thing. But I mean, it worked, but it was also just like really awkward because like it just didn't like flow very well. But I mean, that's like I guess that's kind of like what they're talking about, because I think there was like a few people like they were switching it on and off for like interpreting. So it wasn't just like one person. Was she having trouble because Kiriso's name came up? Dr. Leskinen saw she was having trouble and cut himself off.
すみません。マキセ研究員は海馬妨害を出入りする電気信号のパターンに着目しました。そのパターンが大脳皮質のどの記憶と対応しているのか解析を行って完全なデータを得たのです。
Though you would think, like, since it's like a lecture and everything, and since he's speaking to English and she is going to be interpreting, like, he would know what he's going to say and probably have like some form of a script. Like, why wouldn't he just like have a translated version of that script, give it to her so she would know like what to say and the various spots, or like what she would need to say like when he's saying something, because obviously she would know like when like he's saying this and this. Like, that would probably be easier than be like, hey, I'm just gonna go up here and just fucking speak and you're gonna interpret on the fly, because that sounds fucking like a bad idea and we'll get you tripped up like she just got.
これによって記憶という曖昧でアナログなものを電気信号のパターンの組み合わせというデジタルなものに変換する基礎理論が確立されたのです。これがサイエンス誌に掲載された彼女の論文です。
Science!
そして現在、私たちのチームはその理論をもとに人間の記憶をデジタルデータとして取得するシステムを開発しています。
A wave of whispers swept across the theater.
それはすなわち人間の記憶をコンピューターに保存し、それを活用するシステムということになります。
The whisper stirred into a low roar. I see. So even after her death, Kiriso's research was being carried on. Of course, maybe it was natural that it would be. That was the basic theory for time leaping, which I had proved myself, even if I could never prove it to anyone else in the Alpha World line. My memories had been turned into data and stored on a computer. There was no doubt about it. And what Dr. Leskinen was talking about right now was the basic technology required for that process.
現在、私たちが行っているプロジェクトは主に2つです。1つは医療分野への応用です。
CP. The slide on projector changed.
こちらは精神生理学研究所と共同で行っているプロジェクトです。コンピューターに保存した記憶データを海馬妨害を通して再び元の脳に書き戻すというもので、
Incredible.
Man, someone who looked like a grad student in the front row shouted. Dr. Leskinen didn't seem particularly put off by the interruption. Maho continued her interpretation.
信じがたいですか。その気持ちは理解できます。私も皆さんの立場であればそう言ったでしょう。しかし、この研究に私たちは手応えを感じています。これが実用化できればどんなに素晴らしいことでしょう。例えば、老化による記憶障害、あとはアルツハイマーなど、そうしたものへの対処療法が期待できます。